So in a growing number of prison systems, software now helps decide classification, who is watched, who is flagged, and whose letter gets read first. Today, four experts and thought leaders who live this reality and also who advise and do research in this field will help us ask how we can do that responsibly among many other applications and uses of technology and AI in particularly. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are joining from. A very warm welcome. We have a remarkable room. Throughout the session, we'll have close to 60 colleagues from 27 countries, the jurisdictional leaders, the private sector and practitioners, academics and civil society voices. And thank you all for being here. I am Pedro Das Neves. I'm the CEO of IPS Innovative Prison Systems and IJIS in North America, and the founder and editor-in-chief of the Justice Trends magazine. We are here for two reasons that belong together. To launch the 15th edition that you have probably either received or had the chance of reading online, and to have an honest and practical conversation about AI in criminal justice, and particularly in corrections. What it really is today, and what it can responsibly do, and what it asks of those who live these systems. In my the 15th edition of the Justice Trends magazine, the theme of the magazine is AI in criminal justice. Probably, I don't know if you can see it or if you got it, the paper version. So the theme is AI in criminal justice, use cases, opportunities, standards, and governance. In my editorial, I called it When Machines Meet Mandates, because that is the moment we are in. AI meeting the enduring imperatives of human rights, reform, and public safety. The question running through every page is simple. How do we harness the technology while keeping the human person at the center of justice? The contributions are very concrete. AI for incidence awareness, contraband screening and infectious disease detection. Look at the reform of recidivism prediction, the European Union AI Act as a regulation, probably the first comprehensive regulation in the world in this matter, and the right of defense, responsible AI capacity and share standards, and a glimpse of the personal AI that may help people navigate parole and reentry by 2035, or who knows, maybe next year, at the pace that technology is moving. We may be talking faster than 2035. And three convictions run through all. Data governance is the precondition. Transformation must truly transform, not just digitize, and staff remain irreplaceable. So in the edition, we have, Ashwini, who is here with us, and Maria Cardielios from the IJIS Institute, talking about AI use cases and responsible AI capacity. Mike Sparling talking about corrections in 2035. Stefan van der Veen talking about AI contraband screening. Dr. John May and Ivan Calder talking about AI infectious disease detection. And many others, heads of corrections, ministers of justice, secretaries of justice, bringing their own views and on how their organizations are looking at the use of technology and AI. So talking a little bit about my different hats, and because I will talk a little bit about my experience as well. I edit the magazine, and as you know, IPS does research and advisory and builds some of these systems as well. So I will use my work as an illustration. And of course, once the panel begins, I will keep my own views out of it, even though I'll bring some questions to our guests, but I will let our guests lead. What have we learned? Is that AI's value comes not from the clever algorithm alone, but from embedding these algorithms into existing systems, namely offender management systems that run the institution on data that the institution owns and governs. In practice, that means smart program recommendations matched to a person's assessed needs, decision support from recidivism and risk predictions, always for a professional to wait and never as an automated verdict. AI agents that staff can simply ask about the case or an individual record, AI video analytics that turns events into structured incident reports, and a jurisdiction-contained language model with retrieval that reasons only over that jurisdiction's own policies and data, and never on a public model on the open internet. Two honest caveats that I would like the panel to press on. Keeping a human meaningfully in the loop is harder than it sounds. People tend to defer to a confident machine, and this is one of the challenges that we may face. And bias. And bias has to be effectively reduced. In fact, in one of the initiatives that IPS has been involved, in this case in the European Union, we've been using adversarial debiasing to test for and reduce exactly the level of bias that exists in databases and systems. And we also, I would like, just before passing to the panel, also to just to think a little bit about a very interesting article that I read yesterday. It was a critical view by Zina Makar about the datafication of incarceration. And basically, in the article, she warns that these same tools turn communication into a constant data trail, reaching families and advocates too, and that the incarcerated people, often from marginalized communities, become test cases for technologies that then spread to society. So her question is, how can we do this in a responsible way? And what are the impacts that this has also on the individuals that we are involving to test these technologies? So I think this is also something for us to think a little bit about. So about our panel, our conversation follows 4 questions. Where are we really today? Where is the strongest potential for institutions and for people in their care? What foundations make adoption responsible and useful? And what should leaders be doing now? To explore them, we have 4 thought leaders, 4 people who see this from very different angles. Ashwini Jarral is a senior advisor of the IJIS Institute, founder of the AI Center of Excellence for Justice, Public Safety and Security in the United States of America. Ashwini has more than 25 years in digital transformation and information sharing. In this edition, the lead piece on AI uses governance and share guidance was written by Ashwini, and we thank him very much for that and for giving us the honor of that. We also have Simon Bonk, is the founder and principal of Beyond Inertia. He is the former CIO of the Correctional Service of Canada and former deputy CFO of the Canada Border Services Agency, among other roles, where he was the head of research for the Telio Group also for a while. So as a former CIO at the center of a large public institution, he also chairs the ICPA's Technology Solutions Network. In this edition, he wrote about Beyond Pilots, how AI may quietly become real in corrections. Pia Pulaka is the director of Reimagining Criminal Justice, CEO and founder of MindTech, and she's a forensic psychologist. And she's in fact behind Finland's pioneering smart prison work. In this edition, she wrote on AI literacy and the rehabilitative potential of these tools. So Pia focused more on the human side, supporting people in care and AI literacy. And finally, last but not least, a former Secretary of Justice of the State of Espírito Santo, Dr. Rafael Pacheco. He is also the former president of CONSEJ, the Council of Secretaries of Justice of Brazil, and is a leading voice in Brazil's prison administration debate. And he was interviewed in this edition on the Espírito Santo's intelligence-led model. So he not just had the leadership he has different roles, of course, that he had in his career, but he had not just the leadership of a jurisdiction, but also running or leading the Council of Secretaries in Brazil. So a quick reminder to everyone watching, please drop your questions in the Q&A box as we go. We will take the best of them near the end. And now let's begin. I will start with one question to the panel, starting with Ashwini. And the question is, how would you describe the current state of play for AI in justice and public safety? Ashwini, you've spent the last year cataloging how AI is actually behind being used across justice and public safety. Cut through the hype for us. Where are we really, and how should we even categorize what AI means in this sector?
Sure. Pedro, thank you so much, and good morning, good day, everyone. And thanks for having me on this panel. So to answer your question, Pedro, let me just start with where we are as a global enterprise in justice and public safety in adopting AI. We are all over the place because the reason we're all over the place is that some countries, some agencies are very well ahead of adopting and embracing AI because they see that how AI can benefit them in achieving some of the operational efficiencies in absence of hiring staff, because we are seeing a lot of challenges around staff recruitment and retainment. So a lot of agencies are looking from that perspective. There's some that are just getting started because they do see the value of how they can basically bring AI into their organization or into their nation and start benefiting from the positive side of AI. And then we are seeing countries or agencies where we have zero adoption because of very strong, I would say, laws, or not having any laws or any guidance. So we are seeing all over the place. So it's very fractured. So from U.S. perspective, to say this, that I would say in U.S. we're definitely living in a very fractured environment because we do not have a national framework or a national law that oversees how AI should be using. So in absence of that, that's what's happening in the United States today, that states are actually taking the lead to actually say, okay, how we can actually put some legislation in the place. And this number should actually give some insight into folks that in the United States alone, for example, in 2025, we saw that there were approximately 1,200 or so AI bills or the laws that were introduced. Did everything get passed? Answer is no, because of a lot of politics, a lot of requirements, a lot of back and forth. But just alone this year, where we're sitting today is June 12th, and we have already seen almost 1,500 new bills on AI introduced in 45 states. So that tells you that everybody's trying to do something with AI and trying to control it. So in the United States, we're definitely at a place where we're using in variety of majority levels of AI implementation. When we look globally, we see that European Union have done a fantastic job putting the framework together, of putting the laws together and guiding the adoption and embracing AI in justice and public safety. Then we go to Asian and African markets. We are already seeing that the AI is being embraced, and some countries are definitely not equipped with all the technology that is needed, but they're trying their best to even use small models to look at the efficiency on what they can actually bring into, like doing simple things like risk assessment, asking simple questionnaires, doing a visitor management, right? And making sure that there are all of these basic things that can be in place so they can actually provide the services with the limited resources they have. So I would say, Pedro, that we are all over the place. There's no one maturity level that we can say that we have accomplished in justice and public safety today.
Thank you, Ashwini. Simon, you argue the question is no longer whether, but how deliberately. Is the field moving from pilots to something real, or is it still stuck? What's your view on that?
Well, and I think Pedro, the question isn't simply what can AI do? I think that the starting point really has to be around this not being a technology conversation. I think in our sector, AI sits in complex institutions that have operational pressures, workforce challenges, legacy systems, fragmented data. I can go on. But so for me, the real question is around is not about the tool or the how. It's a modernization question. I think it's Peter Block, the author Peter Block, who talks about how often being a precursor, and we really should be focusing on the what and why. So I don't think it's simply a question of what can AI do. I think it's what kind of justice system are we trying to build, and do we have the strategy, governance, risk discipline, readiness, and the assurance mechanisms to employ AI responsibly and usefully. And I think that when we think about AI implementation, there's two risks in my view. There's the risk of adopting AI too quickly or poorly, but I think we also have to start to consider the risk of standing still. I don't think we think about the status quo as it's not neutral, and I think often we do, and I think it often gets in the way of actually the modernization question. So I think the leadership challenge is to manage both sides of that risk of poorly governed innovation, and then the risk of allowing the status quo to prevail. And I would start to align a little bit with what Ashwini is saying, is that the current state of AI is uneven. As he said, we're all over the place. And one of the areas where I'm a little bit skeptical or cynical about the AI adoption is that I'm not convinced we've fully adopted previous waves of technology. And I've been in modern jurisdictions where inmates have tablets and things of that nature, and you have a few officers trying to manage 150 inmates without even a PC in place. So I think we also have to start to think about what's our history in this space, and are we ready for digital period? And again, how is that digital tool, or whatever the digital tool, how does that start to play into the broader question of modernization? And I think that unevenness applies in both adoption but also readiness. And I think Ashwini alluded to that as well, is that, yeah, there's some people that are maybe deploying it, there's some people that may be employing it, but are they ready for it? And I think that unevenness, I think, is important, because I think it's going to start to create a have and have not scenario, which I don't think is good for our sector. I think it's going to potentially exacerbate challenges like retention and recruitment in those organizations that aren't adopting modern tools. So I think I'm a little bit skeptical, but there's momentum and I think that momentum is being driven more by the private sector and their tools than the actual jurisdiction. So I think that there's lots to think about, and I think there's both opportunities and risks. But I think that, as Ashwini said, it's really uneven. But to me, it's really about not the how question, it's the what and why question, and I think that's where we need to start.
But Simon, just a brief note on that. So you think that the fact that we lost somehow the digitization or the digital transformation part of it, or not all the jurisdictions are so mature at that level, that will generate a big gap between jurisdictions on the one hand, but also that if they don't have that basic level, then it will not be possible for us to be talking about the use of AI for sure, right? But on the other hand, I just want to give you an example, and that comes before also passing the floor to Rafael. But I would ask you to make a quick note of this. I was in Brazil, which is a country where digitization is very uneven, also between the different states. Different states are at different levels. Some states are very underdeveloped. Some states are quite advanced. And I was at the national at the federal level at the ombudsman office, and they are using AI to analyze the letters from inmates, for instance. So they're doing that so that they were not able. Brazil has now over 950,000 inmates. They receive like letters and only from a small fraction of those because they are the federal level. But the ombudsman, they had no way of dealing with all the flow of letters that they were getting from inmates, and they are now using AI not just to read the content, but to provide quicker answers and to redirect those letters to whom they should do that. And my question is, don't you think that we may have different levels of adoption in this process?
100%. But again, I think though that adoption is often one-off. You mentioned and highlighted one specific use case. I think that where corrections needs to start is what's their strategy, what's their vision, and then AI is one tool to address the opportunity. And yes, that one use case, and it might be very valuable, but how has it been employed? Have they put the governance in place? Have they put the right rules around human in the loop and things of that nature? Or have they simply deployed a tool to try to solve a problem? And again, have they taken the steps to actually identify what the root cause of that problem is? They may be applying AI because it's a shiny bauble as opposed to actually solving the problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Rafael, from a Brazilian and Latin American vantage point, does the picture look the same on the ground? So what's your view on this? You are muted, Rafael. Need to put your mic on.
You hear me?
Perfect. We can hear you now.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for having me here. We are in the middle of something very special here in Brazil. Today is the Valentine's Day here in Brazil. Okay? So it's a very nice day in our country. So, sharing my point of view for this question, here in Brazil, because you are always here with us, AI is advancing very fast, and justice institution cannot ignore this reality. From my side, from my experience in public safety and corrections, I see AI as a powerful tool to support professionals, improve efficiency and help institutions to respond to new challenges. However, the technology must always serve people, never replace human judgment. I believe that an AI here in Brazil can and should be used to review repetitive processes and help improve routines, especially in the penitentiary systems. But I see some people here in Brazil stopping thinking, analyzing, and take decisions, and leaving this scenario for the AI. It's not good, and I would say it's very dangerous. Just to give an example, one of our judges here in Brazil was punished because he gave more than 1,000 sentences using JT15. And for sure, people started to wonder in Brazil if do we need a judge or not? Can we replace the judicial system for the AI, or should we keep the judges giving us sentences? So AI is very, very nice tool to support us in our duty, but we have to do that carefully.
Thank you very much, Rafael. Pia, you write that some of the most promising uses are in decision support, and in rehabilitative and psychological support. But you affirm that AI must augment professional judgment, not replace it. I think it goes very much in line what Rafael just mentioned about the use of AI by judges as well. So where is the strongest, safest potential to actually help people in custody?
There's probably many ways, but if we think about rehabilitation and healthcare in prison sector, and then, for example, compare it to public healthcare and mental health services, so they have already undergone quite rapid digital transformation, including use of AI in diagnosing, case management, reporting, risk analysis, disease detection. So I think correctional services will likely follow these developments in the coming years. We are still a little bit lacking behind. And then from the so-called rehabilitative and psychosocial side, there are, of course, ways to help with the general offender management and case management in offender management systems, to do risk analysis, needs analysis, analyze program suitability, recommendations for different activities based on the offender's background data. And then even the kind of systems like virtual reality for rehabilitation, already chatbots, conversational AI has brought a lot to therapy sector lately. So there's definitely many ways to support care and rehabilitation also in prisons. But of course, it must be done in an ethical way and supporting human rights and also all other rights, fundamental rights that prisoners have.
Thank you, Pia. Rafael, at the level of the whole system, dynamic security, intelligence, integrated information, where does the AI can really contribute on that? Where do you see that AI could support operations in the prison system?
I believe AI can reduce bureaucracy. We have a lot of bureaucracy here in Brazil. We can improve the information management, for example. We can allow the professionals to spend more time focusing on people, improving the relation between police officers and inmates, for example. In correctional systems, we can help strengthen rehabilitation programs, improve the communication with the families, support safer and more efficient operations. I believe the field for AI, it's wonderful here in Brazil because we can reduce the human efforts and use the machine and the AI to support and to improve all of the routines. But again, we cannot replace the human judgment.
Thank you, Rafael. Ashwini, of your 4 clusters, which one would you say delivers value soonest with the least risk, and which should we should be most careful with?
I think when we look at the internal operational efficiencies, improving the workflow and improving the process, I think I see that as a least risk, because we already have enough knowledge, we already have enough data to say how our operational processes work today, right? And how we can build an AI capability to actually enable and enhance our productivity. And that is where I see least risk. And when I give example of operational process, for example, right? So when we have somebody coming to visit the folks who are incarcerated in our correctional system that we are actually providing services to, their family and friends wants to come visit them, right? And there's all this paperwork, all that upfront thing that we have to do, prepare for their visit. And I think that that is something where AI can easily help, because we already know who they are, right? All we're doing is taking their information and streamlining that process. The other thing that I see is that, of course, we today live in a very diverse culture where we speak different languages, right? And all of our staff might not have a experience with those languages. So how we facilitate that interaction between the staff and the family members who speak different language. And we see AI as actually providing that capability and making that experience very fruitful and I would say very friendly, right? Because these family members, these folks who are coming to visit, they're already under a lot of stress and a lot of trauma because their loved ones is already have gone through this process and now they're serving in our correction ecosystem. So we want to make sure that we give them everything that they need to make that experience very fruitful and friendly. The other thing that I will say is that resource allocation, right? We all know we have different things happening. Like we always say this, that running a corrections ecosystem is like running a system, a city, right? And we have all these things that are happening. So that is the other thing that we can look at is from AI perspective, where does AI can actually help us with the resource management? So what do I mean by that? So let me give you a simple example that was shared with me in last week or so, where one of the administrative staff in one of the prison system is looking at 10 facilities that they oversee. And these facilities are really old, and they do have a HVAC system which provides heating and air conditioning to these facilities, and they're old. So they would like to actually see today all the service orders, all the actual management of that is in somebody's file or paper. They would like to see, hey, what is the shelf life of my system, when I should be getting this system serviced, and if I have to procure a new system, what I'm looking at, right? So that's where they can have the AI help to do some calculations, give them some report, and say what it's cost to do these services. So these are some of the, I will say, low risk examples where AI can actually help folks who are actually leading the corrections practice.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Simon, you make the case that the risks of AI are often more measurable than the hidden risks of our legacy paper-based systems, and that data foundations and governance are the real precondition. What are the non-negotiable foundations that you see here?
So I think from a foundational perspective, the most important piece that a jurisdictional leader can do, and I've lived this, is make space in the organization. I think that everything that needs to be in place for artificial intelligence, or what I would rather start with modernization, it needs to be around having the space in the organization to be able to do these things the right way. Correctional jurisdictions, we all know correctional jurisdictions are under budget, overworked, and there's an operational crisis every day. But if we're going to do modernization and leverage artificial intelligence as a tool to be successful, then I think organizations have to be purposeful. They have to be diligent. They have to be committed to doing this the right way. If it's done off the corner of the desk, I think it's doomed to fail, because we need the things like data quality. We need the things like cybersecurity, privacy, procurement, legal review, ethical safeguards, clear governance. These are all essentials. But I think we have to go deeper, and I think we have to start to understand, as I mentioned at the outset, a clear understanding of risk in both directions. The risk of adopting AI poorly, but again, the risk of the status quo, because status quo can feel familiar, but it's not neutral. And if current systems are fragmented, paper-based, inconsistent, there's risk to that. There's costs of human costs, there's financial costs, there's public safety risks. So I think before we ask whether we should use AI, I think we have to ask, what future are we trying to avoid, or what future are we trying to create? And again, this all takes time and space and energy, and the best and the brightest in our organization. And then I think, we need that strategic clarity. The organizations have to be purposeful. AI isn't a strategy. AI is an enabler of a strategy. And I think the justice leaders need to be clear about what they're trying to accomplish. Is it safer institutions? Is it better rehabilitation? Is it better reintegration? Improved staff support? More timely decision? Whatever it is. And we need to have that need versus want. I've used the analogy many times as I ponder how to go to work, or when I used to have to ponder to go to work because I work from home now. I have a transportation problem. I'd like that transportation problem to be solved with a Rolls Royce. I want a Rolls Royce. What I need is a pair of shoes. But that takes time, that takes effort. And it doesn't mean that ambition's wrong, but the starting point has to be the business need, not the technology appeal. And so that then leads into business process rethinking. And it shouldn't if we simply automate an existing process and those processes that are outdated or poorly designed, then I think all we're doing is improving an old process or a poor process faster. But that's not modernization. Why do we work this way? What's the information that staff actually need? Where are the decisions delayed? We have to take the time to ask these questions and answer them, and then move to the solution. And that leads into culture and workforce readiness. I think we have an ingrained culture in corrections, and staff are under pressure, and modernization can be seen as just one more thing being imposed on them. And if we don't start to have them understand why we're even doing this, they won't trust the tool. We have to show them how it's going to help them do their jobs. We're going to have to enlighten them and educate them, and that doesn't mean training on the tool. It's on like why are we having to go down this path? And if not, then I think adoption will be weak. And then I think we also have to think about the policies that we need to be realistic. I think a lot of times and I'll use an example here, that in the Canadian federal government, everything had to be bilingual. So people, would have to do, if you worked in English or in French, you would have to get it translated. Everybody knew that they shouldn't be putting in that secret briefing note into Google Translate, but it happened. So again, I think it's not enough to say don't use public AI tools, then that we have to bring in that human in the loop, which we'll talk about a little bit later. And then the fifth foundation is I'm leading into the practical governance. And again, I think we'll probably talk a little bit about that later.
Thank you, Simon. Ashwini, this is where standards and the risk matrix come in. How do agencies avoid each reinventing governance from scratch?
Yeah, so this is what we're finding very interesting is that when we talk about governance, right, in our corrections business or in criminal justice ecosystem, which is highly regulated, a lot of laws and policies, we have some kind of governance. And one of the things that people are struggling with is, now we have AI, we have to put a governance in place. Yes, you have to put a governance in place. Like to what Simon was saying, I think we need to look at is what do we have today that we can leverage and benefit from? If we already have a governance structure in place or some oversight body, we should be working with them to say, hey, now we are starting our journey on AI. Can we leverage the existing governance process? Yeah, if you don't have any, then you need to look at all the stakeholders that will be part of your or impact as you move in forward with using AI. So that is where you should be looking at putting a governance in place. And I think the biggest thing about governance, and governance is also a very loaded term. There's different components of governance that we should be looking at, right? Because very first thing is that, we'll go back to Simon, is that if we're going to bring a capability, and some of the use cases that Pia and Rafael also shared, how corrections can benefit, is that if we take those use cases, who are going to be impacted? We need to look at all the stakeholders from the users who will be consuming or providing those capability to make sure that they are on board and they are part of that conversation day one. Because quite often what happens is that we think about a really good use case, but we do not bring all our stakeholders and all our staff together. Because if we don't have a staff engaged day one, we're already going to have a challenge in moving that forward. And then the staff who's doing day-to-day operations can also help us in clarifying some of the aspects from the governance perspective, but also for that use case. But the biggest thing is everything costs, nothing is free, right? So if you're going to implement this capability from the governance perspective, what is your funding strategy? How you're going to actually not build the capability today? And we have seen this where a lot of projects fail, where we are so much focused on bringing a new shiny object or new technology today into our organization that we invest heavily upfront in bringing that into our organization, but quite often we fail. Hey, once we go live and implement this, how are we going to sustain it? How are we going to maintain it, right? Everything costs sustainability and maintenance, and how you're going to train your staff. And what we are also already seeing in the AI capability, some people automatically assume that my training cost is going to go lower, and that's not true, because training costs is going to depend on your staff's maturity and understanding of the AI capability. So these are all the things that Pedro, I will say that we have to think about from the governance perspective, but the most important thing is not just governance, but take each aspect of governance, clearly define it, and have a buy-in from all your stakeholders that are the decision makers, that are the lawmakers, that are your staff, and that is the community that you're serving. So you can actually see everybody's perspective from their lens as you move in the journey of adopting AI for that use case.
Thank you so much, Ashwini. Pia, you put human competence and AI literacy at the center for staff and for incarcerated people. Why is that a foundation and not just an afterthought?
Yes, it's a key principle in the ethical use of AI. I was part of the Council of Europe working group that drafted the first international recommendations for the use of AI in prisons and probations, and this human accountability was very important. It must remain clear that AI should support decisions, but not replace decision making. And this means that all staff should understand enough how AI does what it does. How does it generate the recommendations and the answers it does, and also be able to challenge them, because AI is not always correct. The bias risk remains. And this is also part of the so-called transparency principle, that staff must also be able to explain to offenders how AI is used, especially if it's used in a way that affects prisoners' rights, for example. So the decision-making logic must be able to be explained. And this, of course, then requires AI literacy for staff, and I think also for offenders, that how to understand how AI is used in your particular case.
Thank you so much, Pia. And picking on that, I think, let me challenge you all, and I'll get back to you exactly on this, on something we also said before. So we all reassure ourselves that the human stays in the loop, right? But the evidence on automation bias is uncomfortable. So when a system hands an overstretched professional a confident risk score, a program match, or a flagged incident, people tend to defer to it. So the override button may exist, but it's rarely pressed. And over time, the human becomes a bit of a formality that just ratifies the machine. So very honestly, is human oversight really a genuine safeguard, or are we building some very efficient rubber stamps? And what actually makes the difference? So Pia, you insist AI must never be a shortcut for professional judgment. So what does it take in training, competence, and culture for staff to keep questioning the machine instead of just accepting whatever the machine tells them?
It requires training and basic understanding of AI and AI processes. And I don't mean that every staff member should be an IT specialist, but understand the basics of AI. And for example, in Finland, there's ongoing trainings at the moment for government officials on the basics of AI, on the ethical use of AI, and also the international regulations regarding AI, because there are already several from Council of Europe, but also from UN, and all we who work in governmental positions, and of course in other fields too, we should be aware of those regulations and legislations, especially because we are working with a very, very vulnerable population that is already under biases and stereotypes from the side of the people who judge and assess them. So this requires training and also monitoring and developing the use of AI. And I would say that the use of AI is as good and as ethical as the organization that is using it. So we talked about organizational readiness and maturity, and also in this case AI literacy of the organization. And in this way, I would turn the question on the other hand, that if developed and monitored responsibly, it's also possible that AI can act as a corrective force, so rather than a source of bias. So this would be the ideal way how AI can support human decision making, that it can actually be more objective in information processing and helping ensure that we actually treat similar cases in similar ways. So this is an important question of rights and equity.
Thank you, Pia. Simon, from a design and governance angle, can we engineer the override to be real? Surfacing the model's uncertainty, requiring a recorded reason to accept or reject, auditing on how often staff actually disagree with the system. You think we can do something like that? How do you see this?
Yeah, I think we can. And I just before I answer that, I just wanted to go back to a point that Ashwini made. He talked about going live, and I think when we start to think about leveraging AI, going live can't be the measure of success. And I think that there needs to be some assurance around what that looks like. But going back to your question, I think there is. And one of the big benefits that I think that AI can bring to corrections is that I think corrections is largely a reactive sector. And I think AI can start to allow us to be more proactive. Now, that proactivity can't mean profiling or automated suspicion or AI becoming the decision maker. I think it has to mean better situational awareness, better support for the human judgment, and earlier and proportionate intervention. And my fear, though, is that when we start to put some of these processes in place, and I use the word processes purposely because I think in the public sector, we often substitute accountability with process. And I think if this starts to become process heavy, putting in, a bunch of different committees, it's just going to become unwieldy. I think we have to boil it down to some human in the loop rules. And I think Pia and others have already started to touch on these, but I think there needs to be understanding. I think there has to be human authority. It has to be built in. I think today, when we do risk assessments, often there's algorithms already in place, and a lot of times those get overridden by human judgment. I think we also have to be careful that when that human authority, and I think Pia touches on this, is that we might be overriding with our own bias. So I think, maybe AI can actually help to deal with that. But I also think that we have to start to build in verification and that ability to override. And I think really important, the two last points that I think are really important are traceability, auditability, if you like, and again, going to that truly holding people to account for their decision making. We don't do that in government broadly, never mind corrections. And if we're putting in governance mechanisms and committees and things of that nature, that's not holding people to account. It needs to be audited, it needs to be assessed, it needs to be reviewed. And if something is not being done properly, okay, let's retrain, let's educate on a first instance of something being done that's not quite right. And if there's a second time, maybe there's something, the conversation has to evolve a little bit. But at some point, we have to get serious about if people aren't using the tool properly, then there needs to be a form of discipline. So I think what has AI produced? Who reviewed it? Whether it was accepted, modified, rejected, or escalated? What was the final decision? And who remained accountable? And I think that those are some thinking that can be put in place to actually make this real.
Thank you, Simon. Ashwini, should concurrence and override rates be measured inside the risk matrices itself, so an agency can see when oversight has quietly just become a tick box? How do you see that?
Yeah. So I think that definitely that should be part of the risk matrix. But I think before we even go to the risk matrix, I think the point that Simon brought up, I think we need to start with what we call a RACI matrix, right? So you clearly define roles, accountability, compliance matrix, saying who's responsible for what. So when something goes wrong, you know exactly who's responsible and accountable, because as you know that in the AI journey and building AI capability, there are different moving parts, right? It's a public-private partnership. I know some agencies who have resources are developing their own AI capability, but majority of the cases, they might be engaging a private sector to build that capability. So I think they need to clearly define who is responsible and accountable if something goes wrong with this model that we are implementing, or I'm going to say the term capability that we're implementing, how fast we can actually take it out of the production. What is the impact if we take it out of production? And now who we need to go and to get this fixed, and then look at the risk side saying, okay, if these are the scenarios, and that's how we talk about use cases that we should look at is, okay, in the perfect world, this is the result we're trying to achieve. But if this is the result that we are not able to achieve, and once we go in production, as we know, as we say, AI have a mind of its own, right? And we might start our journey saying it's perfect. We're seeing everything working the way we expect it to work. And then maybe day 30th, something just goes off rails. And we start seeing the behavior that we did not expect it. And that's where the concept of human in the loop and human on the loop is important. So we can actually then say, hey, let's pull it out and let's quickly go to person who's responsible, and then also then do risk, because the risk is very important calculation in this whole equation, because risk is not just about if the model or the capability behaves adversely or negatively, what is the impact on business, because it's going to cost us money. It might even cost us some liability issues where we might be doing and making decisions if we're just taking the AI output at its face value and not saying, hey, was it reviewed by humans? And we're already seeing that on the judiciary side in the United States, where some of the judges and chief justices have basically said, if you bring something to my court and I see something in an AI, I'm going to ask you a question first. Did you review it? And second is, which portion of this report or the evidence was generated or produced by AI? If none of that exists, I'm throwing this whole thing out. We're already seeing that. And that is the risk that we should be thinking about. But I think as part of the risk matrix, we should look at a couple of things. And I know Simon and P have touched on this. The biggest issue and the elephant in the room in our business in corrections is bias, right? We already know that even without AI, we have huge bias issue. So if we're looking at the bias, the big risk that we have to calculate is if we train on the data that we already know had bias built in, it's going to generate the unfair outcomes. What should we be doing? We should be basically then looking at having some kind of a audit in place. And when I say audit, somebody human who's reviewing those outputs to make sure that, and I will say in this case, when we look at bias, it should be more than one individual and not just one human, because who knows, that human might himself or herself might be biased, right? So we should actually have a group of people looking at the bias concerns, and we should have a separate risk management team assigned to the bias issue. When we look at accountability, because you know that with staff shortages, everybody's doing multiple things. We should have a clear roles and responsibilities so that we are like as human when we check each other's work, right? Even we have same process in place to review the output and the model's behavior over a period of time. So there's a clear accountability. But the biggest risk that we have and that we should be looking from a risk matrix perspective is fairness and due process. That is the big thing in our business, right? So we might be moving in a direction by building a capability where defendants may be judged by system they don't even understand, right? So in that case, we have to look at the transparency issue. We have to look at the testing, but testing should not be about what the perfect scenario looks like, but we should also look at is, okay, what does the adversarial testing looks like? What does the false positive looks like? And those are some things that we should consider as part of the risk matrix. I know that's a long way to answer your question, Pedro, but there's so many different components of risk matrix that people should be considering.
Thank you so much. So our last question, and this is the last question to the panel. Well, it's a group of questions around the topic. Unfortunately, Rafael, he was at the federal justice in the middle of a crisis situation. So, and he was called, so we cannot continue in the session with us. He apologizes, but we do understand, given his role still in government, so he really had to leave. But the next question is, what should justice leaders be doing now to prepare? And Simon, lead that rather than react. What does controlled experimentation look like in practice for an institution that doesn't want to become a passive consumer of whatever vendors bring to them?
Yeah, and I think that's a good point, that they just become passive users of what the vendors bring. And I think that also, just as a sidebar, I think having that understanding, I think, is a really important when you start thinking about governance, is having a register, to understand what AI you actually may have. You may even have AI in your organization that you're not aware of. And I think that also tries to some procurement rules. But again, I think some of what should leaders be doing now, and this ties a little bit back to my answer on what are the foundations needed, but what should leaders be doing now? I think there's three things, and I think the order of these matters. So I think, as I already mentioned, I would not start with the technology. I would start with not, and the question shouldn't be what AI tool we should buy, because I think that gets to the how too quickly. I think the first conversation has to be around the operational opportunity, and I might be being a little bit repetitive here, but I think that's important. And then I think the second step has to come in, is the governance and assurance. If AI is going to be used, I think correctional leaders need visibility over where it is being used, what data it relies on, what decisions it might influence, who's going to be accountable, and how the organization will know whether it's safe, useful, or it's even delivering value. It goes back a little bit to the intervention I made earlier about going live isn't the measure. And I think this is especially important around AI, because I think it is embedded in a lot of platforms. It's in offender management systems. It's in video analytics, digital services, communication tools. So I don't think governance can be something that we think about only after we choose an AI tool. I think governance is what gives the organization the visibility. I was having a bit of an exchange on LinkedIn with a colleague around this point, and that he was lamenting that there's a lot of discussion around artificial intelligence and the tools and things of that nature, and the associated governance. And he said that was the wrong place to start. But I do think that there needs to be some of this done in parallel. And then I think the third conversation is technology understanding. I think leaders don't have to be AI experts, but they have to have a certain level of literacy to be able to ask the right questions and challenge assumptions, understand the limitations, avoid being led by vendor language, have a little bit of technology understanding that can help to inform their operational vision. And I think if they allow the technology to start the conversation, then we risk letting it drive the why. But if we start with the operational opportunity, then AI becomes the enabler. And then just really quickly, 5 practical things, and that I think that leaders could do. Create the small strategic modernization capacity. I talked about making space, and I think this speaks directly to it. It sounds simple, but I don't think it is. Again, I think second is we have to assess the risk of the status quo. I had the good fortune of being able to contribute a little bit to the UNODC ICRC document, and that report does a really great job. At the Technology in Prisons report, that does a really good job of highlighting some of the risks of emerging technologies. But the other half of that conversation is, what are the risks today? And are those risks greater than the emerging technology? And I think that leaders become a little bit more concerned with the new technology and the new solution, because then they are accountable. The status quo risks are almost hidden, they're almost embedded. They've been there for years. So I think that there's some risk bias, if I can put it in there. The third thing, define a roadmap before scaling the tools. We talked about governance. I think that's the fourth, and the human in the loop. And then the last piece is that assurance around implementation. I think there's a lot of focus on the tools. I think there's a lot of standard implementation science, but I think that leaders shouldn't be satisfied with announcements, procurements, go lives. I think they have to ask whether that change is being adopted, whether the practice is changing, whether the benefits are being realized. So that would be my advice to leaders today.
Thank you, Simon. Yeah, one practical step on building competence and trust among staff and people in care.
Yes, first of all, I agree with what Simon said, and I still think it starts from the basic understanding of AI, that staff and also offenders can be more confident if they are first given some kind of a basic training and education about this. So AI literacy, and then on the other hand, also what Simon mentioned, that organizations should be aware of the international frameworks and ethical guidelines, and also establish their own frameworks and guidelines. And in this way, also assure staff that this is something that can be done in a secure and ethical way, even in such a special environment as prison system is. And then from the staff perspective, and maybe also from the offender's perspective, that if you start with some kind of a pilot, not anything large scale implementation in first, but first some kind of a pilot that you identify for staff. I would identify where are the so-called high burden administrative tasks, so that you can easily show then that AI can assist with these kind of tasks and free up time for direct work with offenders, for example, or other work. And then for
Thank you.
offenders, something that is beneficial for them. So probably something rehabilitative or educational, for example.
Thank you, Pia. Ashwini, last word on the readiness check. What should a leader make sure they've done before deploying?
I think the leader should first educate themselves, as I think Simon or Pia mentioned, that the leaders don't have to be a technology savvy. AI is not a technology project. AI is going to impact your operations, right? So very first thing is to understand, if we invest in this AI capability, what do I'm getting myself and my organization or my agency into, right? So that is one thing that I think every executive should take a time to understand AI 101. And we see that, like, everybody says, oh, it's AI and I can use Chat GPT, and Chat GPT is one of the reference. Everybody says, oh, I know how to use AI. No, because there's a lot more to that, because the way things are done. That's number one. Number two is that doing and looking at security and privacy impact. Security and privacy is a core fundamental principle that we, as an in corrections and criminal justice business, have to be very mindful of the people that are working for us, the people that we're serving on daily basis, that it's our job to protect and secure everything that we are basically providing them in way of capability. So if a leader is going to bring an AI capability and they are going to expose their data from their existing ecosystem to build this capability, make sure all the actual regulations have been reviewed, and regulations are moving at such a fast pace. There's so much going on right now from the law perspective, that things are moving. So make sure that you go with the mindset that what you're building today as a leader might change tomorrow. And that is true for the laws, but that is also true for the AI capability. I'm sure that you all have seen that OpenAI just dropped a new version, right? Same thing with Google Gemini, same thing with others, right? So we're seeing a behavior that things are also moving fast in technology perspective, that leaders have to go with a mind. If I invest X dollars or whatever currency you're doing your business in, make sure there's something built in to make sure that you update that, because your model will be irrelevant pretty quickly. So those are some of the things: that security and privacy, governance first, making sure you're protecting the data, making sure all your security and privacy is in place, and making sure that you do the good cost benefit analysis before you start your journey.
Wonderful, thank you. A final, just before going to a question and answer period, and this is to all of you. One AI use you would greenlight tomorrow, and one you would not touch yet in corrections.
So I can start because I think one that I will touch, definitely document management. We have so much documents that and paper-based. I think that is something that we can leverage AI, and it's something that we can benefit from to streamline and automate some of our paper-based to automation, right? And that's one. The big thing that I will not touch wherever I'm using, I'm going to say. Vision-based frameworks like facial or some other new technology that is coming in, because that territory is still not tested. Yes, when we talk about facial recognition as a own, we have made a lot of progress there. But when we look at the broader vision tech-based AI models, they're still maturing, and that's something that I will not touch and bring it into my ecosystem.
You. Pia?
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, Ashwini had very good answer. Document management, and maybe I could say that especially the management of healthcare data, and something that would ease the access to healthcare for offenders. Anything that AI can do to support that would be very necessary, regarding that healthcare and mental health issues are raising in prisons the concern. Yeah.
One of the interesting examples that we had that we have published in the magazine, in fact, Pia, is how the use of imaging comparison for TBC diagnosis is being done in low-income countries by Health Through Walls, for example, in Mozambique and other countries where you can screen thousands of people in a very quick way and only focus on the small number of ones that really need medical attention. So this is really for countries that do not have the possibility to provide a regular health service, this is an interesting example, that I find as well. Simon.
Yeah, and I think Pedro, I think this is a great question for two reasons. One, I think it's actually we each have interesting responses, but the other piece is that I actually think that this is part of the this question actually should form part of a governance structure. I think that a risk tiering model is an important piece that organizations should think about, because I don't think all AI use cases carry the same risk for correctional organizations, and I think that organizations would do well to start to think about what would be low risk, what would be high risk, what would be medium risk. So for me, some of the low risk examples would be, could we develop an agentic, use agentic solutions to search internal policies, summarize public documents, drafting agendas, translating non-sensitive public information, helping staff find approved procedures. You're also starting to see, some agentic solutions to help folks with reentry, basically facilitating either in the community or a pre-release about what services are available to them. But then you've got higher risk examples. Do we really want to leverage AI for security classification, intelligence assessments, segregation or restrictive housing, eligibility, parole or release? So I think that there's certain use cases that are probably higher risk, more sensitive, and if you're going to start down this path, those are probably not the places that you want to go, because you require more governance, you require more documented approval, human review, audit trails, making sure that bias is being minimized, as Ashwini was talking about before, and then that post-implementation. Some of those elements might be very heavy for an organization that's going down this path. So I actually think that your question is a good one for jurisdictions to consider as part of their governance model as well.
Thank you very much, Simon. So I think that the panel discussion gives us a rich map. So I will now turn to the questions of our participants. And we had 3 questions, and I encourage the participants, if you have questions, to interact through the Q&A chat. We have a question from Rachel Hood, and she says, women who are justice experienced are often more unheard. The models that AI uses as the result are less likely to understand their needs. Do you have any example use cases for AI helping with their need assessments in a way that is gender responsive and appropriate?
I cannot give an exact example, but this question and this issue that is discussed in the question is very important one. So how does AI take into account gender perspective or ethnic perspective? So this is exactly the kind of issues where the risk of bias or risk of missing information becomes important. So definitely there's a need to look at the systems also from that perspective, that women-specific needs in prison service regarding offenders. There are definitely such issues. Yeah.
Thank you.
So I will say that I know in US at least we have seen some example where it's in very early stages, this technology, to basically look at the risk and needs, but where they're starting their journey is that conversational AI, where you basically have folks conversing and sharing what they're going through and how they ended up where they are, and then taking all that information. So they have built a model where they're validating that there's not gender specific or race or ethnicity space bias built in. So that is what they're doing. So rather than starting a journey from the standard risk and needs assessment, what they're doing is they're taking a very conversational approach. And so, but again, that technology is very early stages. I know there's some pilots going on, but that is the only example I can think of in the correction setting.
You?
Yeah, and just to build on that, I've seen prototypes and things of that nature, and similar to what Ashwini is describing. The one, and this is an interesting, and I don't know if this was taken into consideration, but I suspect it could be. I've seen a reentry agentic solution, and I'm actually going to go back and ask them whether they have explored for group specific language models where women or indigenous or whatever. So I know that this tool helps with folks with services and different things from a reentry perspective, and what I don't know is whether they've explored women or other groups that specifically in their language their language model, whether they've brought that in so that you could have tailored responses. But it's something that I'll definitely look into, because I think there'd be a lot of value if they did start to do some of that thinking.
Thank you so much. We have another question from Doreen Morishan, and it's about, well, in fact, 2 questions. And I will read the 2 questions. One is on human oversight. What safeguards should be in place to ensure AI tools augment rather than replace human judgment in critical legal decisions? This is the first question. And the second is on the legal and ethical frameworks. Are current regulations sufficient to govern AI in criminal justice, or do we need new international standards to prevent misuse?
I think I'll let Ashwini start with that, because he's probably most familiar with particularly the second question.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I was thinking, Sana. So from the current regulations, are they sufficient enough from I'll say a criminal justice ecosystem? it's yes and no. There's certain components of it that definitely applies that we should be thinking of. But I think we need, as a community, need to get together and look at how to build a standard, leveraging something that is already being built out there. For example, international a standards organization called ISO, right? ISO has put some standards out there around AI. But do they map how we do criminal justice business? Answer is no. But there's certain aspects of it that we can absolutely benefit from. And in the United States, we have NIST AI risk management framework. Then I know the European Union has put some of those together. So there's some things that do apply, but I think we as a community need to get together and say what pieces actually work today and where we need to have additional regulations. And more than regulation, I will say standards or best practices. Today, we do not have any criminal justice specific standard or best practice published, and that was our first shot at to when we decided to do a public playbook for criminal justice, because that was our whole thing was, since there's so many playbooks around AI, but if I'm coming from the criminal justice ecosystem, how should I benefit and leverage that? So we try to do that, but we definitely have a need and a huge need for our criminal justice community across the globe to get together and build a framework or a standard that actually maps to the criminal justice lifecycle.
Thank you. On the human oversight, any comment?
So what
About
safeguards?
the question was what safeguards should be in place to ensure that AI tools augment and replace human judgment?
Yeah, I think the first thing that we need to start our conversation with, you cannot replace humans because you can use AI as a tool, as an enabler to do certain things, but there's no way that in our mission or our business, especially from the legal context, that we can replace humans. And we're actually having this discussion right now with some of the judiciary folks because they're already seeing, and just to put this in perspective, that we already seen a couple of cases where a person shows up in a court, and when a judge asks, do you have a legal representation? And in few cases, they said yes, and it was OpenAI as their legal representation, right? And of course, we know and we already seen examples of that happening. So we live in an interesting time, but the answer is there is no, from my perspective, where we sit today, I don't think that we can replace human judgment or human oversight 100%. We can complement, we can use that as a tool, but never replace humans.
Thank you so much.
Just to challenge this thought a little bit, if I could, because I think Dennis also has a question around efficiency being used to reduce staff. I'm going to suggest to you that it's inevitable that we're going to lose staff. Governments today are already unable to staff up to their current complement. Jurisdictions are going through budget review exercises. You know, I know the Canadian federal system just went through an exercise. I think they're being reduced 10 to 12%, something like that. Maybe it's 8, but significant amount of money. They're going to be looking for efficiency opportunities. They're going to look to AI. Now, are some jobs going to be eliminated and then you can pivot to more value add? I think the answer to that would be yes. But I think it's unrealistic to think that correctional jurisdictions are not going to reduce their staff complement, or alternatively, not staff up the vacant positions that they have today because they're going to drive efficiencies through artificial intelligence or other efficiency measures. Right or wrong, I'm not saying it's right, but what I'm saying is that's going to happen, and I think it's already happening. And so I think what we need to do as practitioners, as advocates, private sector, whatever, I think we have to start to think, realistically about this and start to have, and maybe it's some sort of risk approach of saying, here's where humans can't be replaced and here's where humans could be. Because I think that's where we're headed anyway. So can we start to manage this conversation? Because I think positions are going to be lost. And I think in unionized environments, there'll probably be pushback. And I think my fear is that in some of these environments, people are going to push back on modernization because they want to protect jobs. And I don't think that's good either. So I think we have to start to have an honest conversation about what our reality is.
Thank you very much, Simon, for bringing that up. And this was, in fact, the question of Denis Sukovsky that was there. And I have a couple of questions for you as well. In terms, one of them is related to this. It's about how do we bring frontline staff and unions to this discussion rather than have AI feel like being pushed or imposed to them. How do we bring them to this conversation? And the other one is also, what if incarcerated people and their families were in this panel, on this panel? What would they want us to talk about when we mention these tools? So I just leave these two questions for any of you to respond, because I think these are two very relevant issues also to bring a bit of a different perspective.
I was thinking that regarding staff and staff unions, I think honesty is the first thing. And as Simon said, that we must be honest that to some extent AI is replacing some human tasks already, simple tasks. But AI cannot replace humans 100%, but maybe to some extent. And we can have influence on that some extent if we involve also staff and staff unions in the process of thinking what the regulations and the ethical guidelines for our particular service and organization should be. Earlier, I was already thinking that regarding these regulations, that AI is developing so fast that the regulation is all the time lacking a little bit behind. And that was already evident with the Council of Europe report, that when the report was finished and released, we didn't yet have conversational AI. JT15 only came after the regulations were already released. So there's a constant need to answer to new regulations also. I don't remember the other question you had, but
yeah, one of
it?
the questions was about the family's perspective, and what would the families or incarcerated individuals would like us to focus on this, regarding this conversation on AI.
Yeah, I think they would be specifically interested in the rights question, the fundamental rights and prisoners' rights for communication from inside prison, for example. So and can AI bring more fairness to the management of their rights and their case and their legal needs also? Yeah.
Just really quickly on the legal and ethical frameworks, I think this is going to be a really tough nut to crack for standards. I was down on a panel, admittedly this was a couple of years ago in the United States, and we were talking about this, and there was one CIO from one state, they weren't even allowed to use AI. It was mandated, it's not to enter into the jurisdiction. So to try to start to, bridge some of the different perspectives, I think is going to be a really tough one to have standards. And I suspect, as Pia just mentioned, that what's being put out is already outdated by the time it hits the press, as it were. So I think this is a real challenge, and I think it again reinforces the need for governance. I think the union question, Pedro, is fascinating. I had the pleasure of sitting in on some of the union management meetings, and I remember making a presentation about technology, and AI was very much on the periphery at the time. And the reaction in the room was, let's not even talk about that. We've got bigger issues to consider. But it was funny, on the way down in the elevator, there was just one union steward and myself in the elevator, and he said, we got to have this conversation. We got to start talking about this. And I think it's just that. It's start to have a conversation. I don't think you start out from the point of, lost jobs. I think, again, you start out from the conversation of what's this going to do to how we want our correctional system to look and be and act, and how do we, because I think there's a lot of benefits for staff here as well. I think, we have huge incidents of mental health issues. We have huge incidents of injury on duty leave. If we can start to leverage some of these tools to be more proactive, maybe we can eliminate some of the stressors on staff. And some of the, maybe reduce violence as an example. So I think that there's a value proposition for the unions beyond the numbers of members that they have. But I think, you have to start to have that conversation. And as it relates to families, I think we have to start to thinking about that digital divide. When people come out, are they going to have some exposure to artificial intelligence and those type of things that they'll encounter in today's society? And so I think we as jurisdictional leaders need to start to think about how we can, bridge the digital divide between, the real world and the institutional world.
Thank you so much. And Ashwini, I don't know if you want to add something. Yeah.
So on the union and staff question, it was just posed to me this week at another conference. And I think that we definitely need to have a conversation, and we need to start that conversation now. And I think that the conversation needs to go to, Simon, what you were saying is a benefit, a positive side. Start with your low risk use case, not replacing staff, but how you can use this capability to enhance your staff's productivity. That's the conversation we need to have, but we need to have this conversation. Yes, because there's so much information out there, and especially with some of the layoffs going on right now in the private sector, everybody's blaming AI. Nobody knows the whole story why these companies are laying these staffers off across the globe, right? So I think we need to have that conversation, but where the conversation is going to be fruitful is if we start with low risk and high value productivity use cases where union can see that, and then start your journey on the other, I would say, high risk use cases. As far as the families goes, I think Pia, you touched on this, and Simon, is the human rights. And the most importantly, the privacy. Because if my loved one is in the corrections ecosystem, if I'm using this capability, I want to understand what it means for myself and for my loved one, and what are you going to do with this information? I know a lot of people say in corrections there is no privacy. I understand that, but still, it means no privacy for the people who are your ecosystem, but not about their families and friends who are coming to visit them. So how we're going to protect that information, and we want to make sure there's not human rights violation. Those are some of the fundamental things that we should be thinking, and engaging the families in the conversation around the use cases will also help us address those questions upfront versus later down in the life cycle.
Thank you, Ashwini. It's now on the 27th past the hour, so we have to leave it here. Though I suspect we could keep going for another hour for sure. So if I draw the threads together, the question is no longer whether AI belongs in justice, but how deliberately we adopt it. And the edition's 3 convictions helped us well during this session. Data governance is the precondition. Transformation has actually to transform how we work, not just digitize paper, even though that's very important, of course. And staff and dignity of people in our care remain the irreplaceable center of all of it. My deep thanks to Ashwini Jarral for your contribution, Simon Bonk, Pia Puloka, and Rafael Pacheco that had to leave our session a bit earlier than expected, for your generosity and candor. And thank you all for being here, from people from 27 countries, and for spending the time with us. The 15th edition of the Justice Trends magazine that you can probably see here is out there. You can read it online. And as I wrote in the editorial, this edition is both a snapshot, but it's also an invitation to learn from peers worldwide and to shape a future where innovation serves justice and justice serves people. I hope it may inspire your next step forward. Thank you very much for being with us. Have a good night, a good day, a good afternoon, and let's keep in touch for these discussions around some of the topics that are so relevant for the criminal justice sector. Have a great day. Bye-bye.